Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the take on this Friday morning. It's going to be a busy one. And when you take a look at what's going on today, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. But before we get to that, let's go back to yesterday. We're looking at the Dow. The Dow started off the day relatively flat, had some serious pressure on it almost immediately out of the gates. And we were down 100 points, then 150 points. We actually were down as much as 400 points midday, did recover off of that, but finished down about 210 points. What really was pulling on the Dow was the combination of energy and financials and materials and industrials all getting pulled to the downside, and definitely reflected by what we were seeing yesterday in that big pullback that we were seeing. We're seeing another pullback today, but we'll get into that in just a second. On the other hand, you look over at the NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ actually trading what seemed to be pretty reasonable and holding on to that 14,000 level. It almost seemed like that was a bit of a springboard off of that level and started moving back to the upside, finished the day up about 120 points into the close. So that was pretty impressive. It was tech, it was semiconductors. Semiconductors really did have a heck of a day. We'll get into that in just a second. Then you kick in a little bit of the biotech and you understand why we had the NASDAQ actually moving in the direction. It was completely the opposite of what we were seeing on the Dow side. So what does that mean for the S&P? Flat, exactly what you probably would have expected. A little bit of a balancing act. Turns out the S&P really not doing a whole heck of a lot based upon what was really moving to the upside, what was getting pulled to the downside, and the S&P just sitting right there. We did have crude actually get dipping below that 70 level yesterday. It did finish back up at 71, but it was down underneath 70, and that was something that certainly was pulling on the markets, especially when you're talking about the energy sector. And I'll give you a couple of highlights to some of the movement that we saw there as well. Bitcoin, yep, just underneath 38,000. So not a whole lot of movement there. Once again, it seems like it's been almost stuck in mud to some degree, somewhere call it between 37,000 and 40,000, but a little bit closer to that 38,000 level seems to be where we find ourselves with Bitcoin day in and day out. So yesterday, I talked about the chips. AMD had another one of those days. And I'll tell you what was amazing. We had it for unusual yesterday as well. It hit 4 different times yesterday with unusual upside option activity in there. It did close up about 5.5%. Now, I know you're going to hear, oh, NVIDIA this and that, and everybody's all about. Let me tell you something. There are other names out there that are moving around pretty nicely as well. NVIDIA did have a nice day. Xilinx did have a nice day, but I think you really had to give the tip of the cap off to AMD, especially considering all of the option activity that we had seen in there throughout the day. I did talk about crude, I talked about oil, and Oxy. Oxy's been one of those beta names we talk about oftentimes, right? And when they move up, boy, do they ever move up. When they move down, that beta works the same way to the downside. Yesterday, Oxy down about 7.5%. to the downside. National Oil Varco as well, NOV, that was down about 7%. What wasn't down and was actually moving pretty nicely to the upside, some of those stay-at-home sort of names were rocketing to the upside. You had Peloton, you had Zoom, you had DocuSign, all of those names actually working in a positive way, but it was old tech that was really rocking and rolling yesterday. Take a look at what happened yesterday with Apple moving to the upside, Microsoft moving to the upside, Amazon, Tesla, you go through the whole list, Facebook. We really had a pretty nice day. Throw in Salesforce, old tech, as I say, and a nice move to the upside. That obviously contributing to what we were seeing in the NASDAQ. Volatility index around 17.5, 1770. But what stuck out the most, take a look at the volumes that we were seeing yesterday. Now, I bring this up every day, and I will, and I'll continue to pound on this, but take a look at those numbers yesterday. We're pushing towards that 50 million mark. Yesterday, we actually finished off the day 49.2 million contracts. What a monstrous day of activity. It was fantastic. The moves in and out and throughout the day were absolutely extraordinary. And so a lot of that, I think, had to do with it. And obviously, we know what's going on, quad witching and all the rest of that type of thing. AMC, 1.9 million contracts. We had Apple, 1.8 million contracts. Throw in AMD, which had 1.3 million contracts. Tesla, 1.1 million contracts. That's the million contract club right there. All of those names definitely moving to the with very, very strong volumes, and in many cases moving to the upside. So pressure was on the Dow right out of the gate this morning. You come in, you look at the pre-market, and the Dow, and a lot of that having to do with some of the commentary from the Fed, not just from yesterday, but even today, talking about Jim Bullard We'll be talking about that. I will be on the halftime report today. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about this as well. And some of the commentary. And we've been talking about the inflation side of things. We've been talking about a lot of these things. We've been talking about labor inflation, talking about, the commodity inflation, all of that. And I think that all and some of the commentary we were hearing from Bullard certainly did accelerate that move to the downside, down about 300 points on the Dow. Then we get to the opening bell. We're down about 400 points on the Dow. About a half hour into it, we're still down about 400 points. And now last I looked, we were down closer to 500 points on the Dow. We were also seeing some definite selling pressure in the NASDAQ as well, down anywhere between 30, 40, 50, then 80, then 100. And right now, I'm going to take a real quick look. We're down only about 65 points right now in the NASDAQ itself. So not quite as bad as it was, and it's gotten off of some of the lows, but we'll see. Things do move very rapidly. Keep an eye on the volatility index today, because we talk about the volatility index all the time, and some of that movement, we hit low after low after low just in the last week or so. And now here we are pushing towards that 20 level. We did spike to 20, pulled back underneath. We were in the 19s. And as of right now, we're trading in the low 19s, 19 and a quarter for the volatility index. One would think that would be a little bit higher than that. Yes, it's about a 9% move to the upside, but I would expect that we, after going through 20, would have held on to that 20 level based upon what we are seeing going on within the markets themselves right now. So what's really getting hammered? Financials. Financials taking it on the chin pretty strong today. They've had a really rough June to start off June. Materials, also some pressure there. Energy, some pressure there. And then you look over at technology. It's definitely some pressure, but not a whole lot. Semiconductors were down a little bit, but specific names definitely trading very, very nicely early on. Take a look at what has been going on with AMD. And by the way, as I mentioned, 4 separate occasions yesterday where we were seeing upside movement. Now, we talked about this one yesterday as one of the 2 unusual option activities that we had, and that was with the stock trading underneath 82, but they were buying the June 82s. Those expire today, and then they just started to expand some of the buying, and they were going up higher strikes. Those options yesterday, when we flagged those and we mentioned what was going on with AMD, and I mentioned I grabbed some of these, they were trading between 24 cents and 74 cents. Well, you can do the math very quickly, but if the stock got up and over 85 today, that means those options had to be worth a minimum of $3. So that's a pretty nice spiking move in one single day. That's why when I say the options world, the derivatives world is one you want to know about. That's why, because we will hear people talk about a big move in NVIDIA or a big move in AMD, but the big moves come from these types of leverage that we get when you are and risk that you're able to remove some of that risk, because, for instance, you know exactly what you could lose with the options in a name like AMD yesterday. NVIDIA, it has been strong. And when we've seen the option paper come into that specific name, they're not usually going out in terms of, up in strike. They oftentimes have been going right at where the stock is at that moment. They were buying the 660s when it was trading around 660. They were buying the 600s when it was closer to 600. So we've seen that time and time again, and we've had a nice move, very strong move out of that. That's a name we'll definitely be talking about on the halftime today. 2 unusuals, we're going to go, and then I'll have a couple of unusuals as well as an update when we get on to the halftime report today as well. CCL. Now, we talk about some of those reopened trades yesterday, and here we are talking about another reopened trade, talking about CCL, Carnival Cruise. So stock trading right around 28. We had a buyer of next Friday's expiring June 25th. The 28 strike calls, stock trading 28. The 28 strike calls, they bought 7,500 of those for about 95 cents. So looking for a pretty substantial, solid move to the upside over the next week in Carnival. So that one's pretty interesting. I had one other one. We got some bigger names and more interesting, probably more volatile stuff coming up at the halftime report. But early on, I saw a telephone. Now, we don't talk about AT&T all that often, letter T, but stock is trading right around 28.50, and they were buying 5,300 of the July 2nd expiring 29. So just a little bit out of the money, almost an at the money, but just a little bit out of the money call. Those were 18 cents up to 21 cents. And again, I will bring this up. The risk reward factors, when you're looking at options, what you pay is the most you can lose, right? So as long as we all understand on that side of the page, So the risk here is very minimal for potential gain if the stock were to make that move and drive up and through that 29 level. And it's going to have to do that by July 2nd expiration. So just a little bit of an update there. Folks, have a great day of trading. Understand the derivatives markets. That's where the growth is. And I talk about it all the time. 49.2 million. That is nothing to sneeze at. We ought to have a pretty active day today as well. Although I think we used up some of that from yesterday, but because not everybody wants to hold all the way till Friday. But there will be some that will. And so we still probably will be in for a pretty active day today as well as we go through this quad witch. Folks, have a great day of trading. I'll see you at noon.